On June 21st, 1788, New Hampshire became the ninth state to ratify the Constitution. The Confederation Congress established March 4th, 1789 as the date the country would begin operating a new government under this new Constitution. With that, the United States of America became a more perfect union. This three-part podcast is not about the history of the Constitution, but rather it's about the government this immensely historic document created. In a prior podcast, I discussed the preamble that outlines the government's purposes. The Constitution set up a framework of government within its 7 articles. Here I will discuss what is contained in the first 3 articles, the 3 branches. This in no way means that I am sticking to only what the Constitution says, because my goal here is not for you to know what is and what is not specified in the Constitution with regards to how much the government set up. Instead, my goal is for you to gain a basic understanding of what each branch does and how it operates. The size of each branch has grown over time, and the interpretation of how each branch wields its power has changed as well. But the U.S. has functioned under this one short document for over 200 years. This is what it looks like today. Article 1, the legislative branch. This is the longest article. It establishes the federal legislature we call Congress. Made up of the U.S. House of Representatives and Senate, Congress is the federal government's lawmaking body. Congress is a bicameral legislature, meaning there are 2 houses, the House of Representatives, or the House for short, and the Senate. Elected to these houses are legislators, lawmakers who create legislation otherwise known as laws. Here are some of the things they do. These are some pretty important things. Financing the government is a big one, if not the biggest. However, patents, for example, enable people to have private intellectual property, meaning people can't steal their ideas. Also, Congress is where the impeachment process takes place. If an elected official is impeached, officially accused of wrongdoing, he or she can be removed from office. While the Constitution does mention other responsibilities, such as punishing pirates, there are others it leaves out. Thanks to what is called the necessary and proper, or elastic clause, Congress has more powers than what are simply listed in the Constitution. The courts have interpreted Congress's power to be pretty broad because they decided the federal government has the power to legislate on anything involving money being exchanged between multiple states. In general, the Constitution tends to be pretty vague. Now, on to a breakdown of each house's responsibilities. First, I'll start with the United States House of Representatives, the House for short. House members are known as U.S. representatives. They are elected to 2-year terms from within a certain districts. Districts are determined by the state based on how many representatives the state is allotted after a census population count every 10 years. This is known as proportional representation. For example, Colorado has 7 representatives, each representing a certain area of the state. Because House seats are determined based on state population, proportional representation gives large states an advantage here. The more populous states, such as Florida and Texas, have more people in the House compared to smaller states like Montana and North Dakota. In fact, California, the largest state, has 53 representatives, compared to Wyoming's 1. However, California still has more than 53 times the number of people than Wyoming. The House has the special role of originating any financing bills. They introduce the budget. The Senate must approve of the budget, but the budget fight, it's always a fight in Congress nowadays, begins in the House. The House also decides whether or not to impeach a public official. Now, on to the U.S. Senate. The Senate is considered the upper house because it's more prestigious due to the distinct powers it has. The Senate has the power to approve treaties with other countries and to approve presidential appointments, such as Supreme Court justices. Also, there are only 100 senators, 2 per state who serve 6-year terms. The year that senators' terms are up are staggered between different even-year elections, so that unlike the House of Representatives, the entire Senate is not up for re-election at the same time. One particularly interesting thing about the Senate is, unlike in the House, senators do not have any time limits as to how long they can talk on the floor, meaning in front of the Senate. Thus, there is a famous political move senators occasionally make called the filibuster. Because of those lack of time limits, a senator who doesn't like a bill can talk and talk and talk until finally those sponsoring a bill give up and withdraw the proposed bill. A filibuster can be stopped if 60 senators agree to invoke or put into place what is called cloture. Otherwise, even the threat of a filibuster can kill a bill. Regardless of the filibuster, it's generally very difficult for a bill to become a law. The founders most likely designed it this way since so many bills are proposed. Well over 5,000 bills and resolutions are typically proposed during each 2-year congressional session, but less than 5% of them actually pass. As there are many bills to sift through, most of the bill-making process is actually done in committee. Committees are composed of legislators from both parties and are limited to certain topics. Committees cover roughly the same topics in both the House and the Senate, even if the names slightly differ. Examples of committees include finance, agriculture, and foreign affairs. Most bills never make it out of committee. In general, the bill-making process is a lengthy and somewhat complicated one. This is the process of how a bill becomes a law. Of note, after a bill that has originated in one house of Congress is approved, it is sent to the other house. Often, the other house is already working on a similar bill. In order for a bill to pass, though, it has to pass both houses. Therefore, a conference committee is created to iron out the differences in the bill. The hope is that a compromise bill can be passed. Occasionally, one house will agree to pass the other house's version of the bill, but major pieces of legislation often require a lot of compromises because the final version of the bill must be voted upon again in both the House of Representatives and the Senate before it can go to the president to sign. That is, unless the president decides to veto the bill. Veto, meaning refusing to sign a bill. There is such thing as a veto override, and it has happened. Both George W. Bush and Barack Obama each had one high-profile veto override. However, veto overrides rarely happen because bills are usually discussed with the president in advance, and he usually holds some level of agreement on most issues with members of his party. Also, Congress is very divided, and thus it would be difficult for 2/3 of Congress to agree to anything, especially something that the president, which is a member of many of the legislators' own parties, disagrees with.